The trail crew voted to send the sour Spinster to cook for the meanest rancher. The coffee was already cold when they took the vote. I didn't know about the vote, of course. I was 3 miles north at the time, walking the fence line along the creek bed where the spring thaw had heaved 2 posts clean out of the ground. Caleb was with me, my youngest hand, 17 and still under the impression that work was something you complained about out loud. He was kicking at the frozen mud around the base of the 3rd post when I heard the horses come back across the south pasture at a trot, 6 of them, which meant the whole crew was riding together, which meant something had happened or somebody had quit. I walked back. They were already in the yard, still mounted, hats in hand, which told me it wasn't a quitting. Men who quit don't take their hats off. Del Purdy spoke first. Del was my foreman, 42 years old, had ridden with me going on 14 years, and the only man on the outfit who didn't flinch when I raised my voice. He said, "We got a situation, Gus." I waited. "Mrs. Faber," he said. That was enough right there. Mrs. Faber was my cook, had been for 11 years. She was a widow out of Laramie, a good woman, quiet, never complained, made a biscuit that could keep a man from thinking about home for a full working week. She'd taken sick 3 days prior, a chest cold that had settled in hard, and I'd sent her to town in the wagon to stay with the doctor's wife until she mended. The crew had been cooking for themselves, which meant they'd been eating badly and arguing about it. And I had not weighed in because there are problems a man solves and problems a man waits out, and this had seemed like the second kind. "What about her?" I said. "Doc says she won't be back before spring roundup, maybe not until after." I looked at Del, he looked at his hat brim. "We took a vote," he said. That was the part that should have warned me. 14 years and Del Purdy had never once opened a sentence with those 4 words. "We sent Ike to town," he said, "to the church hall. There's a woman there been doing Sunday dinners for the congregation, week labor for whoever needs a kitchen hand. Reverend Marsh vouches for her. She's," he stopped, turned the hat a quarter turn. "She's available." "Then hire her," I said. "You don't need a vote for that." "She's got a name," Del said. "Folks call her the Sour Spinster." I looked at him. "That's what they call her," he said. "Not us, that's the town's word." "Why?" He turned the hat another quarter. "On account of she don't take to fools, and she says so, directly." I looked at the other 5 men. Not one of them would meet my eyes. Caleb, behind me, had gone so quiet I could hear him breathing. "And you voted," I said. "Unanimously," said Del. "To send her to me. To send her to you." I stood there in the yard with the mud still on my boots and the cold coming off the creek, and I thought about 14 years of loyalty and what it amounted to. And then I said, "How soon?" "Ike already went," Del said. "She'll be here tomorrow morning." That was how it started. Her name was Clara Fenn. She arrived the next morning in Ike's wagon, sitting straight-backed on the bench like a woman who decided years ago that comfort was for people with nothing to prove. She had a canvas bag in her lap and a cast-iron skillet tied to the outside of it, which told me something, though I couldn't have said at the time exactly what. She was, I reckon, somewhere in her mid-40s. Not small, not large. A handsome woman if you looked right, which I noticed, and then I stopped noticing because I had a ranch to run. Ike jumped down to help her with her bag. She was already on the ground by the time he got around the wheel. She looked at the house. She looked at the bunkhouse. She looked at the cook shack, which was old and patched and had a chimney that leaned south by about 15 degrees. Then she looked at me. "You Gus Morrow," she said. "It wasn't really a question." "I am." "They told me you were mean," she said. "Who told you that?" "Everyone in town." She picked up her bag. I figured if everyone agreed, there must be some truth in it. "There might be," I said. She looked at me for another moment, not the way people usually looked at me, which was sideways and quick, but straight on, taking inventory. Then she said, I don't cook slop. I don't make excuses. I keep a clean kitchen and I don't tolerate men who think the cook is the lowest thing on the property. We clear on that? I said we were. Good. She walked toward the cook shack. She pulled the door open, looked inside, and was quiet for about 5 seconds. Then she said, without turning around, I'm going to need a new stovepipe. This one will kill somebody before March. I'll have Caleb see to it today, I said. She nodded and went inside. Dell appeared at my elbow. Well, he said. Shut up, Dell, I said. She had the stovepipe replaced by noon. She'd found the spare one herself in the lean-to behind the smithy, dragged it over, and was directing Caleb with a kind of calm precision that made the boy move faster than I'd seen him move in 3 months of employment. By 2 in the afternoon, the shack was warm in a way it hadn't been all winter. And by 4, there was something on the stove that smelled so good 3 of the hands found reasons to be near the cook shack door that had nothing to do with their regular work. Supper that night was roasted pork and potatoes, and a gravy so dark and deep it made Del Purdy close his eyes when he tasted it. Nobody talked much. That's the sign, with working men, when the food is good enough, they stop talking. After I stayed behind to pour myself a second cup of coffee, she was already cleaning, working efficiently, her back to me. It's good, I said. I know, she said. I almost smiled, almost. I drank my coffee and left. The thing about being called the meanest rancher in the valley was that it had taken me 23 years to earn that name, and I wasn't entirely sure it was wrong. I'd built this place from a single-room soddy and 40 head of mixed cattle I'd bought off a man who was dying of something the doctor couldn't name. I'd been 26. I'd had a wife, briefly. She'd left in year 3, said the land was taking me, and there wouldn't be anything left of me worth staying for. She wasn't entirely wrong about that either. I'd watched 3 droughts and 2 floods and 1 killing winter that took nearly half my herd and 2 good men. I'd had a son for a while. He'd lived 6 weeks. What I had left was the land, and the cattle, and 14 years of Del Purdy, and a reputation for being a man who didn't suffer fools and didn't pretend things were other than they were. Mean was maybe too simple a word for it, but I'd stopped arguing with the name a long time ago. Clara Fenn had been on the property 4 days when she found me in the tack room at 9 in the evening, replacing a broken cinch ring by lamplight. She came in without knocking, which nobody did, and set a plate down on the workbench beside me, biscuits and salt pork and a cup of coffee, and then she didn't leave. I looked at the food. I looked at her. You don't have to bring me, I started. I know I don't have to, she said. I brought it because you've been out here since 5 in the morning and I didn't see you eat anything after noon. I eat when I'm hungry. That's what men say, she said, when they've forgotten what hungry feels like. I picked up the coffee. She sat down on the old barrel in the corner, sat down like she'd been invited, which she hadn't, but somehow I didn't say anything about it. She looked around the tack room. The walls were hung with bridles and halters and coils of rope, and in the corner there was a rack of old tools and a shelf with the spare parts I kept meaning to sort. It looked like what it was, a working room that hadn't been cared for in a long time. You do all your own repair, she said, not a question. Del helps. I mean at night, she said, when everyone else has quit. I ate a biscuit. It was very good. It was the kind of good that made a man feel obscurely sorry for himself, which I didn't examine too closely. Someone's got to, I said. Sure, she said, but most men would have a wife or a... She stopped herself, looked at the bridle in my lap. Or what, I said. Or someone, she said, to make sure they eat. I didn't say anything to that. She didn't push it. That was the thing I'd already started to notice about Clara Fenn. She'd say a hard thing plainly and then she'd let it sit. She didn't repeat herself. She didn't soften it after. She just said the thing and let a man decide what to do with it. After a while she stood up, took the empty plate and walked to the door. Tack room's cold, she said. There's a fire in the main house if you'd rather finish that in there." She left. I sat there with the cinch ring in my hand and the lamp burning and the draft coming under the tack room door, and I thought about what she'd said. Then I picked up my tools and the bridle and I went inside. We didn't talk much the first 2 weeks. I don't mean we were cold, it wasn't that. It was more that we were both people who'd learned not to waste words, and when you put two people like that in proximity, the words they do use start to mean more. She asked questions nobody asked me. Not about the ranch, everyone asked about the ranch, about the land. About how long the creek ran in a dry year, and where the first snow usually hit, and whether the south pasture had always been low or whether it had sunk. She walked the fence lines on her afternoons off, which wasn't something I'd seen a cook do before or since. She came back once with a piece of creek stone in her apron pocket and held it out to me at supper and said, "What do you call this kind?" "That's serpentine," I said. "Comes up all through the lower pasture." She looked at it for a moment. Then she put it on the windowsill above the sink, just left it there. I saw it every morning after that when I came in for coffee. One evening in the 3rd week she asked me about the son of a bitch who'd sold me the east 30 acres at twice the water value and then diverted the creek 2 years later. Dell must have told her. I hadn't brought it up. She listened while I talked and she didn't say anything sympathetic, which I appreciated. When I was done she said, "What did you do about it?" "Bought him out when he went broke," I said. "Took the creek back." She nodded slowly. "Good," she said. That was all. The 3rd week of February, the temperature dropped to something that didn't have a polite name for it. We lost 100 yards of fence in the north pasture when a tree came down in the wind, and I was out in it for the better part of 2 days, helping the crew get the wire restrung before the cattle found the gap. I came back the second night with my hands so cold I couldn't fully open them, and a cut on my right forearm where a barb had caught me through the coat. And the cook shack was the first light I saw from the yard, warm and amber through the window. I came in and Clara was at the stove. She heard the door and turned around, and she looked at me the way she always looked at me, straight on, no particular expression, and then her eyes went to my arm. "Sit down," she said. "It's fine. Sit down, Gus." Nobody called me Gus except Dell, and Dell only did it when he was worried. I sat down. She got her medicine box from the shelf. I hadn't known she had one, and she sat down across from me and she took my arm in both her hands. Her hands were warm from the stove. She didn't say anything about the cut. She just cleaned it, which hurt, and then she wrapped it neat and sure, and she didn't make a fuss about it, which was the only way it was bearable. When she was done, she didn't let go of my arm right away. She just held it, both hands, the wrapped forearm, not looking at me. The lamp was between us on the table, and I could see her face, the line of her jaw, the gray at her temples she didn't bother hiding, the small vertical crease between her eyebrows that meant she was thinking about something she hadn't decided yet. Then she looked up. I don't know how to say this any better than it happened. She looked up and she looked at me, and it was the same straight-on look she always gave me, but something in it was different, not softer, exactly. Clearer, like she'd been looking at something through smoke for a while and the smoke had moved. She said, "You run this whole place like you're the only one on it." "I'm responsible for it," I said. "That's not what I mean," she said. I waited. "You act like you've got to hold it all yourself," she said. "The land, the cattle, the men, the debt, the weather, the fence, all of it. Like if you let go of any piece of it, it falls." "Some years that's been true," I said. "I know it has," she said. "I can see it in the way you move. In the way you wake up at 4 in the morning and go out to check something that doesn't need checking." She looked down at my arm, then back up. "I know what it looks like, a man who hasn't been allowed to put anything down." The lamp cracked. Outside, the wind pushed at the walls of the shack and the stovepipe rattled and then steadied. "Who told you I wake up at 4? I said. "Nobody," she said. "I hear you." I looked at her, she looked at me. "You been here a month," I said. "I have," she said. "You planning on leaving?" She was quiet for a moment. Not the kind of quiet that means a person is deciding. The kind that means they already know and they're choosing how to say it. "No," she said, "I'm not planning on leaving." I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I could, right then, say anything that wouldn't come out wrong or sentimental or like a man asking for something he didn't deserve. So I just sat there with her hands around my arm and the lamp between us and the wind pressing at the walls, and I thought about 23 years and what they'd cost, and whether a man past 50 had any right to want something different. She let go of my arm, she stood up. She went back to the stove and said without turning around, "There's soup. You need to eat before you go back out." I ate. Spring came the way it always does in that country. Not all at once, but sideways. A warm day followed by 2 cold ones. The mud coming up through the snow in patches. The creek running high and then higher. The calves starting and the whole operation shifting into the long, exhausted push of roundup season. Clara cooked for 12 men during roundup. She was up at 4, earlier than me, some mornings, and she didn't stop until the last hand had eaten and the dishes were done. The men respected her. It was a quiet kind of respect, not the kind that gets said out loud, but I saw it. They didn't waste food, they brought their plates back without being told. They kept their voices down around the cook shack. Caleb, who had a 17-year-old's talent for thoughtless behavior, started watching his language sometime around the 3rd week of her being there, which was more than I'd managed to accomplish in 3 months of employment. She never asked for anything. If she needed something, a new cutting board, a crate of salt, a better ladle, she'd say so directly to me once and I'd see to it. She didn't ask twice. She didn't thank me at length. She'd just say next time she saw me, "That ladle's right," and go back to work. It was the most comfortable I'd been with another person in longer than I could honestly say. The trouble, when it came the way trouble usually did, quickly and from a direction I wasn't watching. A man named Harlan Pruitt came out from town in the 2nd week of April, representing 3 of the smaller ranchers who shared the east water rights with me. There was a dispute about a diversion dam I'd put in above the Jessup line. They said it was cutting their share. I said it wasn't. The law in that county was murky on the point, which meant Pruitt thought he had leverage. He came to the house. I met him on the porch. We talked for about 20 minutes, which is about 15 more than was productive. He was a lawyer, or claimed to be a soft-handed man who'd never mended a fence in his life and had a way of talking that made every sentence sound like a threat wrapped in courtesy. Clara came out at some point with coffee. She set the cups down on the porch rail and was going back inside when Pruitt made a remark. I won't repeat it exactly. It was about her. It was the kind of remark that a certain type of man makes about a woman when he wants to unsettle another man, implying something about her presence in my house that was none of his business and had nothing in it worth responding to. Clara stopped walking. She turned around. She looked at Harlan Pruitt for about 3 seconds without saying anything, and I'd learned enough about Clara Finn by then to know that 3 seconds of her silence was worse than most people's loudest moment. Then she said, "Mr. Pruitt, I'm going to tell you something, and I'd like you to listen carefully because I don't repeat myself." Pruitt blinked. "This man," she said, "built everything you can see from where you're standing. He built it with his hands in weather that would have killed a softer person. He's fed 30 families in this valley either directly or because of what his cattle brought to market. He's carried debt that would have broken most men and paid it back with interest and never asked anybody for a thing." She paused. "And he is a better man than you will ever be on your best day. So I'd suggest you conclude your business with some dignity, or I'll take that coffee back." Pruitt looked at me, I looked at him. He concluded his business with somewhat more dignity than he'd started it with. He left. I watched him ride back down the road, and then I stood there on the porch with my hands in my coat pockets, and something in my chest that I didn't quite know what to do with. Clara was already back inside. I could hear her at the stove. I came in. She was stirring something and didn't turn around. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I know I didn't have to," she said. "I wanted to." I stood there in the middle of the kitchen. "Clara," I said. "Oh?" "I need to tell you something." She stopped stirring. She set the spoon on the rest. She turned around and leaned against the counter and crossed her arms and looked at me, that straight-on look, patient, waiting. "I don't know how to," I stopped, started again. "I'm not a man who talks about things particularly well." "I know," she said. "I've been alone a long time." "I know that too." "I don't think I stopped again. 14 years of Del Purdy, and I'd never had trouble saying a direct thing. Now I couldn't get one clear sentence out of my mouth. She uncrossed her arms. She took 2 steps toward me across the kitchen, and she put her hand flat against my chest, not reaching up, not pulling me toward her, just that. Her hand on my chest, right at the center of it, the way you'd put your hand on something you were checking, was still standing. She said, "I know what I'm choosing, Gus. I'm not confused about it. I'm not here because the town thinks I'm unmarriageable and you needed a cook. I'm here because I looked at you, and I saw a man worth being beside." The kitchen was quiet. The stove ticked. Outside, one of the horses moved in the corral and the rope knocked against the post. I covered her hand with mine. That was all that needed to happen. We married in June in the yard, with Del as witness and the whole crew in their Sunday clothes and Caleb crying, which he denied afterward and continued to deny for years. Reverend Marsh came out from town and said the words over us, and Clara wore a dark blue dress she'd made herself, and she didn't carry flowers, which was entirely right for her and entirely right for us. After, when everyone had eaten and the sun was going down behind the mesa, and the yard was lit with the last of that long June light, Del found me standing at the fence rail looking out over the south pasture, and he stood beside me for a while without saying anything, which is his way of saying most things. Then he said, "You know the vote was unanimous." "You told me that," I said. "I mean all of us," he said. "All 6, first thing we'd all agreed on in about 3 years." I looked out at the pasture. The cattle were moving slowly in the low light, grazing up toward the creek. The grass was good this year. The water was good. The fence was solid. "Del," I said. "Yeah." "I need you to know that I know you did that on purpose." He was quiet for a moment. "Might have been," he said. I didn't say anything else about it. There's a thing that happens to a man after enough years alone, where he stops believing the lack is something that can be fixed. He just gets used to the weight of it. Not happy, not unhappy, just carrying. Like a fence post that's listed a little but is still standing, and you keep meaning to straighten it, and eventually you just stop seeing it crooked. Clara straightened it. Not by being soft with me. Not by pretending the years were less than they were, or that I was easier than I was, or that the land was anything other than hard and demanding and cold more months than it was warm. She didn't make anything smaller. She just stood in it with me. Straight-backed, plain-spoken, warm where it counted, and absolutely clear-eyed about every hard thing, including me. The crew never called her the sour spinster again after about the first week. I don't know exactly when they stopped. I didn't hear it happen. I just noticed at some point that when they talked about her, they said her name, and they said it the way men say the name of something they depend on, without drama, without fuss, straight. She kept the creek stone on the windowsill above the sink. It's there still. The last thing I want to tell you is small, and it might not mean anything to anybody but me. About 2 months after we married, I woke up in the gray before dawn the way I always did, that old habit, the 4 o'clock check, the body that couldn't trust the dark to hold. I started to get up. She put her hand on my arm. "It's holding," she said. She didn't open her eyes. "Whatever you're going to check, it's holding." I lay back. I don't know how she knew. Maybe she'd been watching me do it for 2 months and just finally said something. Maybe she just knew. I lay there in the dark and I could hear the land outside, the creek, the cattle, the wind along the roof. And for the first time in as long as I could honestly remember, I wasn't counting anything. I wasn't calculating. I wasn't holding it all up by being awake. It was still there, it was holding. I put my hand over hers, and I went back to sleep.